This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I am your host, John Henson, and this week we're talking politics. All right, now, before you get uncomfortable, this is a totally different angle. We're not going to get into any sort of Democrat versus Republican, platforms or anything like that. But most of our audience out there are lawyers, and at least in my experience, just what I've seen and observed, it seems like people in the legal industry tend to be the ones who are running for office most often. And so I wanted to have an episode all about just the various challenges or obstacles that arise for the people who either run their own firm or work in a law firm, and just kind of how they balance running for a local or a state office. And so my guest this week has lived this. She has had this experience, and she's about to go through it again. And she has graciously agreed to join us and share her experience. And that is Christy Clark. Christy, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So real quick before we jump in, what is your background? Kind of what were you doing before you decided to run for office?
Yeah, I've been a lot of things over the years, but recently my day job has been a paralegal. I work at a law firm that my husband and I founded together. And, we're business and corporate law, trademarks, and intellectual property is where we put our focus. And we focus a lot on helping small businesses get their, documents in order as they launch their business. So they do everything, by the law.
Yeah. And, Chris, her husband, was actually one of the early guests on Center Stage. And so if you want to check out his episode, I think it was one of the first 10 or 20 episodes that we did. And so he was really good to have on. So kind of the first question I have for you, because, I really want to start at the very beginning, because, in my mind, I kind of imagine there are people out there who they're interested in running for office, but maybe they don't really know kind of where to start. So how did you initially decide or make that decision to run for office? And then what did you need to do in order to get all of that in motion?
Right. I have, some issues that I'm very passionate about that are directly legislated for by the in the General Assembly. And so I knew when I was thinking about running for office, I knew I couldn't run for town board or county commission or school board because those issues weren't handled at those levels. And so that kind of pointed me in the direction of the General Assembly. And I had no idea what I was getting into when I decided to run for office at all. The first thing I did was go to the State Board of Elections webpage, and you have to form a committee and get a bank account and get a treasurer and do all those things. Before you can even get started, it has to be done right away so that you're in compliance with the law. And then I looked around for organizations that sponsor training, particularly for women running for office, and attended a bunch of those to kind of get the general idea of what was going to happen to our campaign. It gave me the 35,000 foot view, really. But, it's a lot different when you're on the ground doing it, but it gave me a scope of what might happen. And that's kind of how I got started.
Cool. So now you mentioned you had to have a committee, you had to have, like you said, a treasurer. I'm assuming that you have to have other people, kind of on your team to do this. You can't hold all of these positions. So like, how many people do you have to have sort of in your corner in order to make this happen?
In order to launch, you really just need yourself and a treasurer, and your treasurer cannot be your spouse and it cannot be you, or I guess it can be in circumstance. The state legislature, it has to be somebody else. But you have to have at least two people for a campaign that I've run very high profile, high competitive races and districts that were tight. And so I needed to have a staff of other people. So I've also had a campaign manager, a field manager, so a bunch of volunteers and interns, and around in the hundreds in the volunteers category to do that when I'm running in a race that's super competitive and requires to raise a lot of money and also reach a lot of voters.
Got it. So, all right. So you got everything set up. You started your campaign, and at the same time, or at least prior to starting your campaign, I know you were doing a lot of paralegal work with, you and your husband, law firm. How did you balance your campaign duties with your other job duties? Like, how much does running a campaign take away, if at all, from your regular job duties?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I really tried to maintain my role as a paralegal with Chris as much as I could. But as the campaign accelerated and it became more obvious that I was going to be at meetings at 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. at night, and in between there, I need to be raising money and calling voters and everything, I had to step away pretty much from my job and dedicate it to this race. That is not true for every campaign. Just my campaigns that I have run have been in super competitive districts. And that means that it requires a lot more energy than other ones. If you're running in a district where it is red or blue, whichever side of the aisle you're on, and it's not competitive, that isn't necessary. That much energy and time isn't necessary. It just depends on what sort of district you're running in.
Okay. So then, I mean, and so then let's talk about, because, you talk about you're in a lot of high profile races. You ran for a state house, I believe was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I obviously, I think, in the mainstream, and especially, for, I guess, regular people like me and kind of what we see, especially as it gets closer to voting day, you see a lot of ads out there. Things can get messy. How can someone sort of minimize the effect of like maybe a lot of negative attack ads on the firm's reputation? Because I mean, you're still operating a law firm, working in a law firm, and you still have to, that's still your job, that's still your source of revenue. And if your opponent out there is, generating ads or, criticizing you, making you look bad, that can have negative effects down the road. How do how do you minimize those, or how do you, sort of, I guess, reduce the effect that those sorts of things have on your livelihood?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing they tell you, and when you're running for office, they tell you two things. One is make sure your family's on board. The second thing is, like, if there's any secrets, they're all going to come out. And so you have to be prepared for that in advance. Like, know that if you have some outstanding issue with a client and it's public, like a bar complaint or something like that, I don't get those, but attorneys do. That could be made public. Or if there's a bad Yelp review or a bad Google review of you, those will definitely come out if those exist out in the world. And so mitigating those by cleaning up your data profile on social media and on the internet is the first place to start. Just to make sure that there's nothing strange out there, or disgruntled person who's being snarky and has really no basis, and get rid of all that stuff. I didn't really have any of that stuff out there, but sometimes you do, as business owners, that's what happens. It's natural. So that's the first thing, is just mitigate it and get it, as much, and get out in front of it as much as you can first.
Yeah. And honestly, that should probably be something that you proactively start doing before you ever begin to run, is just to make sure that, at least broadly speaking, you have a good reputation in the community, that there's not a lot of complaints out there about, I mean, you're not going to make everybody happy, but yeah, I mean, we see it every election cycle. Somebody digs something up that, and it's like, you had to have known, right? Like you had. So I don't understand how, even some people forget that or overlook it. But, let's say then that you ultimately end up winning your race, which you did. You won your election. Was it 2016, 2018?
2018.
2018, yeah. So you won your campaign. How then would that affect your business, whether it's someone who is running their law firm, in your case, someone who is working in that law firm and holds a lot of responsibilities in that law firm? Like, what happens in that situation? Do they have to close the firm down, so that you can work full time in your newly elected office? What's the balance like there? What happens?
Yeah, those are great questions. For me personally, Chris went ahead and hired a new paralegal because he knew I wasn't going to have time to be there, because the General Assembly in North Carolina is in session usually from Monday through Thursday, and you have to be in Raleigh. You have to be there all day, every day. There's not a lot of time to do a real job, so to speak, or your day job, or the job that pays the bills, because the General Assembly does not pay the bills, to do that. So you have to be really able to work that into your schedule up there. So the attorneys that I know that I'm close with that are still serving, they would be in the General Assembly in their office or in their hotel room, early 5 a.m. doing legal work for their clients, and then come to the General Assembly and go through committee meetings and session, and then leave and go back to their hotel room and continue work for their clients into the evening, because there's not a lot of time during the day there between, you have committee meetings and meetings with lobbyists and concerned citizens and phone calls and session can be anywhere from 1 hour to 12 hours. You just don't know. So you have to really be opening your mind up to, I'm going to have to work way outside of what I've normally been doing. Like there's no 9 to 5 anymore. That's all gone.
Wow. Yeah. So then I guess on the opposite side of that, whether you lose the election or maybe, you decide to step down, or you don't seek reelection, whatever the case is, because I mean, the majority of people do not become career politicians, I don't think. So then how do you get back into it then? What have you seen in terms of like, people getting back into their quote unquote old day job, for example? What does that end up looking like?
Yeah, the attorneys that I have known have done that have been very excited to get back to private practice and have that control of their schedule and the control of their timeline. And they also care about their clients, and they wanted to be able to spend as much time with them and put all that energy into helping them, particularly ones that are in litigation type situations. And so they were excited about it. After I lost in 2020, I took the year off to kind of clear my head and figure out what direction I wanted to go in. And I knew public service was a place for me. And if I couldn't be serving in the General Assembly, I had to find something else. And so now I'm working in a school because I needed to be somewhere where I was giving back to the community. And that's what is important to me and fills my bucket, as they say. So yeah. That's what I did.
Cool. So I guess what's something that maybe you didn't expect going in? Like you got into Raleigh and you got there and then you were like, whoa, this is a shock. What's something that, maybe you didn't see coming once you got up into your office?
Gosh, a lot of things. The main thing really was the amount of time that everything takes. There's committee meetings can be fast, they can be slow. It's all depending on the chair of the committee. Sessions you can go to session, you can gavel out, you can be in a recess for hours, come back later. And in between there, you can't really leave. You have to be around in case, get called back into session. So things like that, just the schedule there is the General Assembly schedule is vastly different than the rest of the world. And that was an adjustment period for me. And also nothing starts on time at the General Assembly. So if you go to a committee meeting, it's supposed to be at 9, you're going to stand around for 10 minutes waiting for everybody else to trickle in. That drives me crazy because I like to be on time. So, there's things like that were, nothing ever starts on time at the General Assembly.
So it's not that much different than everyday life, apparently.
Right. Yeah.
None of our meetings start on time either. So, and kind of the last question I have, and this is just me being curious personally, we get this sort of perception from people in office, from the media, just about how, it just seems like, and you mentioned it, things take a long time to accomplish. Is there something that maybe the media or just people in general have a very big misconception of, just because we're not fully aware of what's actually going on?
Yes, absolutely. So, all the bills that make the news are the ones that are high profile. They're a controversial issue. There's something where heads are butting and it makes the media, and there's press conferences and releases and all these things. And those are teeny tiny amount of bills that get passed or heard in the General Assembly. 90% of the bills are not controversial and they are unanimous. And so they don't talk about that. They only talk about the ones where it's, the infighting and the grind and everything. And some of that, of course, that happens because, we're on two different sides of the aisle. We have varying opinions on things, of course. But generally speaking, most of the time, it's not a controversial bill. It passes unanimously with both sides of the aisle agreeing almost all the time. And so people, you never hear about that. And so that's something I think is a detriment to the situation because the controversial part is really, really small. Really small.
No, that is actually really surprising because, especially North Carolina, where we are, oftentimes it's a swing state. And so I've just kind of had this impression that just like, there's always fighting. No one can ever agree on anything. Nothing ever gets done. But that is actually really encouraging to hear that, like, no, for the most part, it sounds like people actually do work together and get along. And it's just those one or two things, as is the case everywhere, where you require a lot of extra debate. Well, this has been really enlightening. I feel like I've learned quite a bit. Hopefully people out there, if they've been considering potentially running for local or state office, that they're a little bit, they feel a little bit better about doing so. So one last question I have before we wrap up here that I ask everybody, and that is, if you had one final piece of advice for our lawyers and the rest of our audience out there, what would it be?
So we'll put it in the frame or the context of people who might want to run for office one day, whether it's for judge or, General Assembly or town board or mayor or whatever. Do it. Don't wait. Go for it. Jump right in with both feet. Everyone is vastly qualified to serve in public service. Everyone is. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're a pharmacist, a nurse, a teacher, a lawyer, a paralegal, whatever, everyone is qualified to serve, and don't be intimidated thinking, oh, it has to be the lawyer that graduated from Yale and has a master's from Harvard and went here and did that and served with, in the DC or whatever. It doesn't have to be any of that. You can just be a regular person and serve your community by getting elected. So
awesome. Love it. Yeah. I truthfully, I might look into it. I've always had just like a passing curiosity about it, but I've never really taken a deep dive and looked into it. And so it's something that I might actually look into now. Christy, this has been really insightful. I really do appreciate you taking the time to join us. That is going to do it for us this week here on Center Stage. Continue to rate, review us, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're consuming the show. We're all over the place. And I know you know that as well. That's going to do it. Christy, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/centerstage.